This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Czech Chris, London, UK. Nicholas Nickleby, by Charles Dickens. Chapter 18. Miss Knag, after doting on Kate Nickleby for 3 whole days, makes up her mind to hate her for evermore. The causes which led Miss Knag to form this resolution. There are many lives of much pain, hardship, and suffering, which, having no stirring interest for any but those who lead them, are disregarded by persons who do not want thought or feeling, but who pamper their compassion and need high stimulants to rouse it. There are not a few among the disciples of charity who require, in their vocation, scarcely less excitement than the votaries of pleasure in theirs, and hence it is that diseased sympathy and compassion are every day expended on out-of-the-way objects, when only too many demands upon the legitimate exercise of the same virtues in a healthy state are constantly within the sight and hearing of the most unobservant person alive. In short, charity must have its romance, as the novelist or playwright must have his. A thief in fustian is a vulgar character, scarcely to be thought of by persons of refinement, but dress him in green velvet with a high-crowned hat, and change the scene of his operations from a thickly peopled city to a mountain road, and you shall find in him the very soul of poetry and adventure. So it is with the one great cardinal virtue, which, properly nourished and exercised, leads to, if it does not necessarily include, all the others. It must have its romance, and the less of real, hard, struggling, workaday life there is in that romance, the better. The life to which poor Kate Nickleby was devoted, in consequence of the unforeseen train of circumstances already developed in this narrative, was a hard one. But lest the very dullness, unhealthy confinement, and bodily fatigue which made up its sum and substance should deprive it of any interest with the mass of the charitable and sympathetic, I would rather keep Miss Nickleby herself in view just now, than chill them in the outset by a minute and lengthened description of the establishment presided over by Madame Mantalini. "Well now, indeed, Madame Mantalini," said Miss Knag, as Kate was taking her weary way homewards on the first night of her novitiate, "that Miss Nickleby is a very creditable young person, a very creditable young person indeed. Upon my word, Madame Mantalini, it does very extraordinary credit, even to your discrimination, that you should have found such a very excellent, very well behaved, very very unassuming young woman to assist in the fitting on. I have seen some young women, when they had the opportunity of displaying before their betters, behave in such a oh dear, well, but you're always right, Madame Mantalini, always, and as I very often tell the young ladies, how you do contrive to be always right, when so many people are so often wrong, is to me a mystery indeed." "Beyond putting a very excellent client out of humour, Miss Nickleby has not done anything very remarkable today, that I am aware of, at least," said Madame Mantalini in reply. "Oh dear," said Miss Knag, "but you must allow a great deal for inexperience, you know." "And youth?" inquired Madame. "Oh, I say nothing about that, Madame Mantalini," replied Miss Knag, reddening, "because if youth were any excuse, you wouldn't have quite so good a forewoman as I have, I suppose," suggested Madame. "Well, I never did know anybody like you, Madame Mantalini," rejoined Miss Knag most complacently, "and that's the fact, for you know what one's going to say before it has time to rise to one's lips. Oh, very good." "For myself," observed Madame Mantalini, glancing with affected carelessness at her assistant, and laughing heartily in her sleeve, "I consider Miss Nickleby the most awkward girl I ever saw in my life." "Poor dear thing," said Miss Knag, "it's not her fault. If it was, we might hope to cure it; but as it's her misfortune, Madame Mantalini, why really, you know, as the man said about the blind horse, we ought to respect it." "Her uncle told me she had been considered pretty," remarked Madame Mantalini. "I think her one of the most ordinary girls I ever met with." "Ordinary!" cried Miss Knag, with a countenance beaming delight. "And awkward! Well, all I can say is, Madame Mantalini, that I quite love the poor girl, and that if she was twice as indifferent looking and twice as awkward as she is, I should be only so much the more her friend, and that's the truth of it.' In fact, Miss Knag had conceived an incipient affection for Kate Nickleby after witnessing her failure that morning, and this short conversation with her superior increased the favourable prepossession to a most surprising extent, which was the more remarkable, as when she first scanned that young lady's face and figure, she had entertained certain inward misgivings that they would never agree. 'But now,' said Miss Knag, glancing at the reflection of herself in a mirror at no great distance, 'I love her. I quite love her. I declare I do.' Of such a highly disinterested quality was this devoted friendship, and so superior was it to the little weaknesses of flattery or ill nature, that the kind-hearted Miss Knag candidly informed Kate Nickleby next day that she saw she would never do for the business, but that she need not give herself the slightest uneasiness on this account, for that she, Miss Knag, by increased exertions on her own part, would keep her as much as possible in the background, and that all she would have to do would be to remain perfectly quiet before company, and to shrink from attracting notice by every means in her power. This last suggestion was so much in accordance with the timid girl's own feelings and wishes, that she readily promised implicit reliance on the excellent spinster's advice, without questioning, or indeed bestowing a moment's reflection upon, the motives that dictated it. 'I take quite a lively interest in you, my dear soul, upon my word,' said Miss Knag. 'A sister's interest, actually. It's the most singular circumstance I ever knew.' Undoubtedly it was singular, that if Miss Knag did feel a strong interest in Kate Nickleby, it should not rather have been the interest of a maiden aunt or grandmother, that being the conclusion to which the difference in their respective ages would have naturally tended. But Miss Knag wore clothes of a very youthful pattern, and perhaps her feelings took the same shape. 'Bless you,' said Miss Knag, bestowing a kiss upon Kate at the conclusion of the second day's work. 'How very awkward you've been all day!' 'I fear your kind and open communication, which has rendered me more painfully conscious of my own defects, has not improved me,' sighed Kate. 'No, no, I dare say not,' rejoined Miss Knag, in a most uncommon flow of good humour. 'But how much better that you should know it at first, and so be able to go on, straight and comfortable. Which way are you walking, my love?' 'Towards the city,' replied Kate. 'The city!' cried Miss Knag, regarding herself with great favour in the glass as she tied her bonnet. 'Goodness gracious me! Now, do you really live in the city?' 'Is it so very unusual for anybody to live there?' asked Kate, half smiling. 'I couldn't have believed it possible that any young woman could have lived there under any circumstances whatever for 3 days together,' replied Miss Knag. 'Reduced, I should say poor people,' answered Kate, correcting herself hastily, for she was afraid of appearing proud, 'must live where they can.' 'Ah, very true. So they must. Very proper indeed,' rejoined Miss Knag, with that sort of half sigh, which, accompanied by 2 or 3 slight nods of the head, is pity's small change in general society. 'And that's what I very often tell my brother when our servants go away ill, one after another, and he thinks the back kitchen's rather too damp for 'em to sleep in. These sort of people, I tell him, are glad to sleep anywhere. Heaven suits the back to the burden. What a nice thing it is to think that it should be so, isn't it?' 'Very,' replied Kate. 'I'll walk with you part of the way, my dear,' said Miss Knag, 'for you must go very near our house, and as it's quite dark, and our last servant went to the hospital a week ago with St. Anthony's fire in her face, I shall be glad of your company.' Kate would willingly have excused herself from this flattering companionship, but Miss Knag, having adjusted her bonnet to her entire satisfaction, took her arm with an air which plainly showed how much she felt the compliment she was conferring, and they were in the street before she could say another word. 'I fear,' said Kate, hesitating, 'that mama, my mother, I mean, is waiting for me.' 'You needn't make the least apology, my dear,' said Miss Knag, smiling sweetly as she spoke. 'I dare say she is a very respectable old person, and I shall be quite pleased to know her.' As poor Mrs. Nickleby was cooling, not her heels alone, but her limbs generally, at the street corner, Kate had no alternative but to make her known to Miss Knag, who, doing the last new carriage customer at second hand, acknowledged the introduction with condescending politeness. The three then walked